evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to share that tonight we have the opportunity to spend time with two incredibly accomplished individuals, an amazing New York Times bestselling author and an esteemed film director. I am personally very excited to hear this conversation as a journalist in the media myself. I'm Gina Valentino, a graduate from the class of 2014, a member of the Alumni Association Board of Directors, and the chairperson of the Graduates of the Last Decade Committee. I'm thrilled to welcome you tonight to our Great Danes Connect event with Eva Lesko Natiello in a conversation with Stephen Soucy. Before I introduce Stephen, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. Please use the Q&A feature if you have questions. Please make sure your mics are muted and sit back and relax and enjoy an evening with Eva and Steve. A little background about Steve. Steve graduated with a bachelor's degree in English in 1991. He is a theater producer, film director, and educator. His current projects include the Broadway-bound Romeo and Michelle the musical and the feature documentary film Merchant Ivory. His previous projects include the Los Angeles Ovation Award-winning celebration theater production of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and the Tony Award-winning The Boys in the Band. Stephen teaches in the Department of Business at Santa Monica College, where he's been associate faculty since 2001. Stephen is also a fellow Alumni Association board member. Stephen, I'm now handing it over to you. Thank you so much and enjoy the program.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. And Eva, welcome to you as well.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So I'm going to start us off with Eva's bio. So Eva Lesko Natiello is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of the psychological thrillers The Memory Box and Following You, which have sold hundreds of thousands of copies worldwide in multiple languages. Her essays and articles can be found in HuffPost, New Jersey Monthly, Martha's Vineyard Magazine, NJ.com, and elsewhere. She is a sought-after speaker at book festivals and writers conferences nationwide. As a former VP of Global Communications for Estee Lauder, Inc., which jump-started over 25 years as a communications, marketing, and branding expert, she now coaches authors on how to publish and market their books. Eva is a graduate of the University at Albany, 1986, where she majored in psychology and minored in business. She is the unofficial UAlbany record holder of 2 distinctions, and these are funny. Fastest visit to health services as a freshman, mere hours after arriving on campus, for falling from her top bunk and breaking a foot. Maybe I shouldn't be laughing at this, but I'm dying to know how that happened. Leaving her to hobble to class on crutches for the first 8 weeks of school. And secondly, longest use of a UAlbany textbook. And I love this too. To this day, Eva's dog-eared copy of Abnormal Psychology sits on her desktop and is referenced regularly to aid in the development of her novel's characters. While Eva cherished her time at UAlbany, she fully admits that the winters were tough. So upon graduation, she promptly moved to the Bahamas, where she enjoyed a short but treasured singing career. Eva is a member of the International Thriller Writers and the Authors Guild, and she's busy working on her next 2 novels and lives with her family in New Jersey. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was a mouthful.
Well, you've done a lot. So to get started, I'm really taken by the Abnormal Psychology book, because I thought I was kind of a lunatic for keeping all of my books from UAlbany. But I love that you connected with that book and probably connected with that course. So my first question is, how did attending, if at all, University of Albany impact you as a writer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the reason why it kind of makes me pause is, depending on where in my career you asked me that question, the answer would be completely different. If you asked me 20 years ago, it would have been different. And So you're asking me today, and certainly my psychology major impacted my career in a really big way, but in a completely different way than I thought it was going to. I had planned on a career, I planned on being a therapist, and after I graduated with the psych degree, I made a pivot, and I did go first to the Bahamas, and I was a singer, a resort singer for a little while. But that book, that class, Abnormal Psychology, was one of my favorite classes in the major. And, I read it like a novel almost, because it was so fascinating to me when things disconnect, when things in the psyche disconnect and behavior is not normal. And it does inform a lot of my characters. And so I write psych thrillers, I write psychological thrillers. So a lot of my research is in that book, because I try and figure out my characters. Now, I would have never known back then. I never planned on being a writer. So I could have never answered your question that way, until I had finished my first book or written my first book. The other class that really impacted me, and this is going to surprise you, is I took theater makeup. And I was really into the theater. I was really into acting for a while, and I took theater makeup, and I don't remember what year it was that I took it, but I remember that the midterm exam was, we all had to create the makeup of an 80-year-old on ourselves. So I had to do my makeup and transform myself to an 80-year-old woman, which was tough. It was tough looking in that mirror, I gotta say, but what a foreshadowing. I just hope that someday when I'm 80, I can do the makeup of a 25-year-old or a 22-year-old and reverse things. But I got this real sense of, and this is a theme that runs through my books, the theme of facades. And certainly makeup is a facade, and how you can see one thing and a person appears in one way, but they are entirely different than the way they appear. It's kind of funny that I went into a career, one of my other career stops, which maybe we'll talk about, was in the cosmetics industry. But I would say from studying psychology and taking that class in theater makeup, those were really important foundations for where I am and where, the trajectory of my career.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very inspiring, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it is inspiring, the fact that you came upon, you weren't planning on being a novelist, right? That wasn't like early days. And I mean, I think a lot of people would find it inspiring that you kind of honed in on this, or, felt, or found that connection a little bit later in life. I mean, I talk to a lot of people who are like, oh, I have this novel inside me. And again, we'll talk about how you help people with that. So I guess the question is, what prompted you to start writing?
Well, so you mentioned this before, after I graduated from Albany, and I really was not into the cold at all. And I was a big baby about it. I did, right after I graduated, moved to the Bahamas and started a short but sweet singing career. And then when I came back to Manhattan, I moved back to New York. I started a career at Estee Lauder. So in the cosmetics industry, and I worked there for many years, and I was the head of the global communications department there. And I loved that career. It was amazing, very creative. I loved cosmetics, and I did some really wonderful things. And then I got married and started having kids, and I had my children in New York, and my husband and I decided to move out of Manhattan. We were living in New York. We moved out of Manhattan. We moved to New Jersey. And I took a leave from going, working full time, and I was consulting. And I had these little kids, and I was raising them. I was at home, and I really missed my work. I missed the creative process. And I knew I had to get involved in something, and I really didn't know what it was. I was trying a lot of different things. But one day, I mean, this is it. This is what really changed everything. I mean, I'm not kidding when I never wanted to write a book. And I couldn't even say what you just said, Stephen. Like, a lot of people think they have a book in them. I never thought I had a book in me. But I read in the style section of the Times, this was like in early 2000s, about people Googling themselves. And this was a brand new concept back then, right? Putting your name in the search box and what comes out of that. And there was a kid in the article, there was a 17-year-old boy that was interviewed, and he did this with his high school buddies, and he found out he was on a missing persons list in Canada. He was living in LA, but he was on a missing persons list in Canada. And he did not know until he Googled his name that he was kidnapped, and he was taken from his home when he was 2. And he was raised in LA. It was such a sad story because he loved his childhood. He loved so anyway, he was afraid to go to his mom and say, what's this about, you know? And he went to a teacher and said, I found this out about myself. I don't know what to do. It was pretty scary. And the teacher had to, you know, tell the authorities. And it was just a sad story. The woman who raised him went to jail, and she was his mom, and she lost him in a custody battle, and it was this whole big story, but she took him, and she never thought there'd be Google ever, you know, like, and she didn't even change his name. Okay, so I read that story one day. I could not get it out of my head. I was started to dream about it, and I thought, how could you not know something about yourself? How could you Google your name and find out something so personal that you didn't know about yourself? It seemed impossible to me, right? So in my dreams, I started dreaming about a woman of small children, of young children, who did this, who Googled her name and found out about a past that she had no clue about and that she didn't remember. And I'm telling you, I would wake up out of dreams and have to write for hours and have to write everything down. All of the ideas for my first book, The Memory Box, came in dreams. And I just wrote the minute I would bring my kids to school, and I would just write all day. And I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like somebody was channeling the book through me. I mean, there were times where I had to look up words that I used, and because I didn't know what they meant. And I was like, oh my gosh, that works there. You know, I really thought the story was coming from somewhere else. So I turned that into a book, and I did end up studying for a little while at the new school. And my professor was just an amazing person, and he was the first champion of the Memory Box, and I went on to try and publish it. I finished it, and it was really just this idea that kind of, you know how you hear authors say all the time, like, books find them, you know, and I feel like that happened, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I love that story because that is something that you hear from writers where, well, you just said it, where, you know, the story had to be told through them. And sometimes they feel that, you know, their hands moving and they're coming up with the words, or they're typing, and there's something going on there where somebody or something is communicating through them.
Yeah.
It brings to mind, I read something about writer Patricia Highsmith, and one of my favorite books is The Talented Mr. Ripley. And I read a biography of hers, and she was somewhere on the coast in Italy, and she looked down from, you know, her balcony, and she saw this man standing by himself, solitary, just all by himself. And the whole idea of the talented Mr. Ripley kind of came to her in that moment. So there's something about that connection that is just so fascinating for those of us that haven't found that or don't write in that way. I also, this was a question I was planning on asking later, but it seems apt now. So when you were writing that book and also, following you, do you find that when you're writing it, you plot beforehand, you come up with a structure, you work on an outline first, so you're kind of writing towards something, or are you just writing chapter after chapter without a lot of planning?
So both of those books, when I sat down to start them, I knew the beginning and I knew the end. And I never changed either one. What I usually do is, I don't know who these people are, right? I don't know these characters. I don't know the scene, the setting, for instance. And I have to figure it out. And so I write to understand who they are, and I write to figure out what's happening. So I would say I'm a good 2/3 of the way through before I outline. So I don't really outline until I know where it's going, who these people are. The books that I'm working on right now, one of them, I was like at 60,000 words. That's a good chunk of the book, 2/3 in, and I finally figured out who this protagonist was, And what I mean by that is, like, what is she all about, and what are her motivations, and why is she doing this? And I couldn't hear her voice in my head, until about the 60,000 word mark. And then I write a really solid outline, and that really helps to guide me then to the last third, which is really tough for me. The last, that last third it's a bit tough, but and sometimes I'll like write the ending because that is so fresh in my mind. I know what's going to happen. I'll write that and then back engineer, because sometimes you have to, like, especially if I ever engage with like professionals, I had to talk to a private a detective for my second book, Following You, and I really needed advice on because one of the characters works at a detective agency, and in San Diego. It was a fictional version of San Diego, but I really didn't know anything about that environment. And so when I would talk to this detective, I would say to him, I need for this to happen. Can you tell me how I can get there? That makes sense. And so he would help me sort of back engineer the things that I needed to work for the plot, or I needed to work for the character. And I would say to anyone starting writing or thinking about writing and not knowing where to begin, it's always a great idea to jump into writing at the part that makes you the most excited. It's so hard to maintain an enthusiasm for a long work like a novel. I mean, it could take you years to finish. So your mood is going like this all the time. There are days where you think it's the best book ever written, and then times where you think no one's going to want to read it, and you shouldn't even bother finishing it. That's crazy, and that's what happens. And so start where you're the most excited, and try and like I just said, sometimes I'll skip to the end, and because I'm excited about that, and it just helps you, and you fill in.
How do you push through on those days where you're doubting yourself or you're doubting the project itself?
Well, I have a sign over my desk. I'm not sitting in my office right now. I wish I were, because I'd show you my abnormal psychology book, but I have a sign over my desk that says "Squirm." And I wrote that one day because I found myself, I was at a really difficult part with my second book. And you know what, when you work from home, we all did for a time being, but it's so easy when something gets hard to go put a load of laundry in, or make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I mean, it's so easy to not sit there and work it out. And then I thought one day, nothing gets done when you quit. If you quit, you're not going to get it done. And maybe you need to sit there and squirm. And so that's what I do. I squirm it out. But there's another secret sauce that I'm going to let you in on that I do when I'm trying to work out a plot, like maybe a problem with the plot or a problem with the character or something, and I can't figure it out. I have a couch in my, next to my office, and I lie down on the couch and I close my eyes and I pretend that I'm sleeping. I actually pretend to myself that I'm sleeping. And inevitably, within 10 to 15 minutes, I had worked it out. Just closing my eyes, I see it. I don't know why that happens, but it's probably silencing everything, and just allowing you to see the movie on the inside of your eyelids. You're seeing it play out. But the couch is a really great idea. And squirming and sitting in your chair and just forcing yourself to knock it up until you figure it out.
That's great. Another question, I like the line that you connect to your work. It's on your website. It says, writing from the intersection of oops, yikes, and awe. So can you explain that a little bit? And I mean, that seems to kind of encompass your overall approach to writing, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there was a time where I was writing. So I guess after my first novel was written, and, I don't know, we didn't touch upon this, but I could not get it published. I could not get an agent. I could not get it published. 87 rejections. Agents turned the book down, turned me down. And I just went into this despairing, this despairing place. And a lot of my friends who were writers said, change it up, do something else, write it, start another book, which I could not do at the time because I was really depressed about the first one. And so I started writing essays, personal essays that they're humor essays, self-deprecating. I write satire, and they were short pieces, and I was publishing in HuffPost and things like that. And then I write, thrillers. And a lot of people were like, how could you write these goofy, funny essays that are this self-deprecating humor about parenting or, basically being a screw up in one way or another, and then write these dark thrillers? And there was this disconnect. And so I was thinking, how do I, how can I come up with an umbrella that sort of encompasses the stuff that I work on? And that's when I came up with intersection of oops, yikes, and awe. And that covers pretty much what I write.
Yeah, and you touched upon my next question, which was so you had those rejections. You tried to get an agent, and you made the decision to self-publish The Memory Box. And I guess, can you tell us a little bit how that came about? I mean, I guess you got tired of the rejections and decided to take the reins on this. But like, how did that kind of enter into your as an option? And then I would imagine kind of part two of this question is the amazing professional experience that you had in the world of business for so long probably helped you actually, pull the trigger on that. So
yeah, definitely. Well, I can tell you, deciding to self-publish did not come easily. I did not want to do that. I always thought of that as the booby prize, really, like that was the last resort, and I was never going to need that last resort. But after 87 rejections, because I was so new and so green and had never written anything before and knew nothing about the industry, I really did think that 87 people who were professionals in the publishing industry knew, they were all agreeing on one thing. And that was this thing was not getting, I was not getting represented, and this thing was not getting published. And that'll do something to your confidence, I can tell you. So I was not like, oh, I got to publish this thing on my own. No, because at that point I thought, who's going to read this? They know what they're talking about, and this is not something I'm ever going to find a readership for. And I was really down about it. I mean, I, buried it in the backyard, basically. And I didn't think it was ever going to get published. And about a year later, a friend of mine rang my doorbell, and she had a book in her hand, and she said, I've just read this book, and it was Gone Girl. And I hadn't heard of it. I didn't know what the book was. I hadn't read it. It was just newly out. And she had read in The Memory Box many times. She was one of my first readers. And she said, you need to read this right away. And then after you read it, you need to get The Memory Box published no matter what. And, I mean, it was true. I read that book and all of a sudden it clicked for me. I knew who my reader was. I knew it was the same reader. I knew what, I knew I had a book on my hands. I knew it was an exciting book. That really changed everything for me. And then I just kind of said to myself, well, if you give up now, then it's your fault that this doesn't, like, you did the work, and it was the most wonderful time in history as a writer. You didn't need the gatekeeper anymore. You could publish on your own, but this was the promise I made myself, that I was going to only self-publish if I did it in the strongest, most professional way possible. And I gave myself a year to study everything I needed to know to get that book ready for publication and to self-publish it. And within 1 month, so the next month, I mean, I couldn't believe this, it was the #1 book on Amazon. And it was selling like crazy, like crazy. I was hearing from people all over the country who were getting in touch with me and asking me about like readers group questions. And I was being asked for interviews. I just couldn't believe they had even heard of it. I thought just my family was still, we weren't even related, by blood. And they were buying the book. And I thought it was just my relatives only that were buying this book, but it was selling like crazy. And
so do you think that was because there were like Amazon has the recommendations, like if you liked Gone Girl, you're gonna love The Memory Box? Like, I mean, like what kind of marketing, I mean, were you working on marketing or really okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it took me that year that I took to learn how to self-publish, I was also working on the marketing plan.
Okay.
So even all these years later, I'm the only person that does the PR and the marketing on my books. And absolutely that has had a huge impact, because you cannot, in 2022, you can't publish a book and sit back and see what happens. You just can't. And I hear from authors a lot who like, oh, I'm just going to throw it out there and see what happens. And I said, well, I can tell you what's going to happen. It's going to sink to the bottom of the ocean of books that are now available to readers. And you have to actively market, but it's not, there are many ways to do that. There are many ways, because a lot of I also consult now, and I teach authors how to do it. And you don't have to be an extrovert. You can be an introvert and still market. And there's a million ways to do it. But I know that with that first book, so when I was working at Estee Lauder, when I started all those years before, the founder of Estee Lauder, so Mrs. Estee Lauder, was still working at the company, and I did a couple of projects with her, and she was by far the best marketer I have ever met in my life. And she launched a brand of cosmetics in 1950 when nobody knew who she was. She had 8 different products, and she could not get the gatekeepers to answer her phone call, take a meeting with her. She was a nobody. And she used some marketing strategies that I used. I modernized them and I used them to launch my book. And I'll tell a very funny story. She was trying to get into Saks Fifth Avenue. She wanted to sell there. That was her dream, and nobody would take her call. And she decided one day that she was going to bypass the gatekeepers and she was going to go straight to the customer, so straight to the woman, right? So she went into Saks Fifth Avenue one day and she had a little bottle of her perfume that she formulated. It was her first perfume. And she discreetly poured it on the rug at the entryway of Saks Fifth Avenue and then left and waited a week. And everybody wanted to know, all the women wanted to know, what do I smell? The minute they got out of those, circular doors, and they were like, what am I smelling? And of course, she called them a week later and she said, I was just wondering if anyone's curious about what the fragrance was that, and they're like, yes, you have to come in. And so she got herself a meeting, and that was her flagship store. That was her first store. So what I learned from that was she went straight to the customer. She didn't wait for the yes from the gatekeeper at that point. And I remember when I was in that state of, what am I going to do now with this book? I can't get a gatekeeper to take me on. I said, I've got to go straight to the customer. And in that month, and then when it hit the New York Times bestseller list and the USA bestseller list, USA Today, I knew that I had to let the readers decide. It was the readers I needed to appeal to, really, in the end. And certainly to this day in 2022, that's what an author, you know, we live in a very lucky, a very fortunate time. We can go straight to the reader.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's again, that's when, like, knowing your strengths, right? If you're a writer and you're out there and you're working on something, you know, again, you had such great, you know, you had such strengths in that other area. Not everybody has that. I mean, I'll get into it in a little while, but you know, your consulting business that you do, you can actually, you know, help people kind of learn some of these, you know, some of these things that would help them, you know, if they were to publish their book. But we had one question, which I'm gonna link it to my own question. But Ann West asks, where do you get your inspiration for your novels? So you have your 2 novels that have been published. You're working on another 2 novels, and I guess part 2 of that question is, what themes do you like to explore? So inspiration for your novels, and then what themes do you tend to kind of, you know, explore and kind of thread through your work?
Well, I heard this a long time ago. An author said that we write what we're scared of. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but I completely understand it now. That, and certainly with the memory box, I mean, that idea came from reading that article in the New York Times on people Googling themselves. But it also was about my feeling of having a horrible memory. I have a horrible memory, and it really scares me sometimes. Like, I think that I'm losing my memory. And I thought, you know, I understood the protagonist when she finds out she doesn't remember things about her past, and she you know, she is this downward spiral, and it's this very scary thing. I kind of was able to put my head in hers, or hers in mine, and understand what it's like. And I was tapping into my own fears. So I get that. And so for following you, a couple of things happened. And this is the wonderful thing too, about how, you know, a lot of people say you have to have a really wonderful imagination to be a great novelist. And I heard another author say once that you just have to be a wonderful observer. You just have to be able to observe everything. And then sometimes in your own mind, like for my books, I just crank them a little to the dark side. You know, I observe something, and then I, to make them a thriller, you know, I infuse a little bit of darkness in it. But for the second book, something happened way before I even became a writer. And I knew at the time it was such an interesting event that happened. I was having dinner with my family, and we were at a restaurant, and we were leaving to go to my brother-in-law's house. And this was in New Jersey, and it was a stormy night, of course. It was a dark and stormy night. But I was following him in a car back to his house. We were going to his house for dessert. And I had my other brother-in-law with me, and I'm following his little silver car. And I don't know anything about cars, right? Except for what color they are and are they compact. Okay. So I'm following the little silver car, but we hit, you know, a red light that he goes through and I don't. And then we hit a detour that he gets through and I do. So several times I lose his car, but then I always find it, right? I always find it. I'm relieved. I find his car. I don't have my nav on, obviously. And I think it was before navs even existed. But he only lived 10 minutes away from this restaurant. But I'm in the car for like 15, 20, 25. It's like 30 minutes. And that's when I realize I'm following the wrong silver car, you know, and it's taking me who knows where. And I thought, wow, that would be a great idea to open a thriller. You know, somebody's following someone, and that happens in Following You. The protagonist is following a colleague of hers to a New Year's Eve party, and it's an open house New Year's Eve party, because not only did I want her to end up at the wrong house, I wanted her to walk through the door. So without ringing the doorbell, right? And how would you do that? Okay, because it's this big open house and people are coming and going and whatnot. So I just knew that night when we got lost and we followed the wrong car, who knows where, we almost ended up in Pennsylvania. And how long was it going to take me to figure out I was following the wrong car? That something like that would be a great scene, you know, and could really start this thriller off in the right place. And this protagonist ends up obviously inside someone's house. And of course, it's the wrong house to get stuck in, and she doesn't leave very soon, or maybe not at all. I can't tell you the end, but yeah.
No,
so
that's
real life stuff, I guess, you know.
I mean, I gotta say, you know, that, you know, it's just, you definitely have the inciting incident down. You definitely kind of know, you know, structure wise. And again, you know, I said this in one of my questions, or I wrote this, you know, your work does feel like it's high concept, right? It's something that you come up with this great idea and then you write it. But for, like, you know, it's also, it just seems like pitching your work, it feels like it should be very easy for you to get, you know, a publishing deal, or, but whatever. But I will say it feels high concept. It feels you can describe it in a sentence, which is just so amazing. So, has there been, you know, has there been interest, like, from, you know, from Hollywood, or, you know, like, can you talk about that? Is that something that you would love to see happen to the work?
Sure. I mean, I see these books visually. I write visually. So, and in fact, when I'm writing, I illustrate as I go along. I write up floor plans. I hang them on my wall. I create maps of the town that they're in case there's a chase. I need to know who's turning left, who's turning right. Everything is super visual for me. And I would love for, well, certainly both of them. The Memory Box, I always thought would be a fabulous movie, film, or perhaps a series. And I did have a TV agent and a film agent at CAA for a while, and they put the Memory Box out on submission. And so I did get interest from Laura Dern, actually, to develop a series. And I mean, I know, Stephen, you could speak to this better than I could, but it didn't get off the ground. And I'm not ruling anything out. I think it could still happen. I think it's a great high concept. I've heard that many, many times. And of course, you know, once the Memory Box hit the New York Times bestseller list, I can't tell you how many agent calls I got. You know, everybody wanted to talk to me then, but a lot of wonderful things happened. You know, I had translations, I sold audio rights, I got the CAA film and TV agent. So I just think it's gonna happen. I don't know. You know, we'll see what happens with that. Following You is sort of a locked room thriller. And I always kind of saw it as a play, really, in my mind. When I originally wrote it, it just took place in that house, in the basement of the house. And, but it's grown since that original concept. But that could be a really great film too. So you never know. I mean, these things take a long time too, don't they?
Yes, yes, they do. And I have friends that are, that have written pilots for, you know, hour-long dramas that they're pitching again, you know, a couple years later. But, and again, you're working on 2 novels. I want to make sure I get this question. It's in the chat function here. You are, so somebody asks, Sherry Friedberg asks, how can you write 2 books at the same time and not get confused about storylines and characters? Are the books similar or completely different? I was going to ask you about these books at the end, but I want to make sure, you know, yeah, you know, we cover it, because I also think it's related to what we were just talking about, because your first 2 books might get interest as if you, when you publish your next 2 books. So I just think you having that work, the first book could sell, book number 3 or 4 for you, and then everybody goes back and says, what else does she have? So Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about how you keep you keep two books going at the same time.
Yeah, well, that was not intentional. I was not intentional, and I was nearly finished with number 3, and then I got this idea. I mean, it goes back to kind of what I said before, that you need to keep the passion high, and you need to keep the enthusiasm high, and you need to keep that well full, and when your well gets dry, you've got to figure out how are you going to fill it up again, and how are you going to get those creative juices going. And sometimes that happens with a project. You're in the middle of the project, or you're in a tough part, and the squirming is not working. It's not working, no matter how much you're squirming. So and I did get this other idea, and it was like a post-COVID story, and I was so excited about it that and I started dreaming about it. And I thought, you know what, I have to capitalize on this flow that was happening. And sometimes I do get into that, like a flow, and I really have to protect it and take advantage of it and leverage it as far as it will take me. But I don't confuse the plots or the characters, because that's like you confusing two uncles. You're not going to confuse them. The characters are they're like family to me, and I get super close to them, and my friends often joke and make fun of me about how I talk about them, because I was recently at a party, and I was telling someone about the character, and someone was like sort of eavesdropping and said, oh, she thought I was talking about a neighbor or something. She's like, who are you talking about? Dolores? And I'm like, no, my protagonist. So I talk about them. They exist for me as like fully formed people. And so I don't see them, I don't mix them up. Like maybe when I'm reading 2 books, sometimes I do that to the point of whoever brought that question up. Sometimes I do. It's hard for me to separate, but when I'm writing them, they're distinct. They're pretty distinct, and their storylines are pretty distinct. And Stephen, to your point, that's kind of what I'm hoping happens. There are a lot of agents that are waiting for this 3rd book, because I did self-publish following you as well, and they're asking to see this 3rd book as soon as it's done. So I am going to perhaps try to sell that one. I do think the strongest position to be in these days as an author is to have books in both areas, traditional and indie. And if you span that, you're in really, really great and strong, in a strong situation.
We have one more question. This is from Josephine, and she's asking, what is the #1 quality you believe an aspiring writer should possess? And do you have any additional suggestions for new writers? She asks how to stay motivated. I think you talked a little bit about that motivation and what you do, but what's the quality you believe an aspiring writer should possess?
Well, I will answer that in a minute, but the thing I always tell someone who wants to sit down and write something and hasn't yet, but wants to, is act before you think. Act before you think. If you think too much, you can think yourself straight out of ever doing anything. And it's the acting that's going to fill you. The minute you write 1 paragraph, write 1 page, read it back, sit in the middle of it and say, gosh, I wrote that. That's amazing. But if you keep thinking about it, you have nothing to show for that, nothing. And that is what really sinks your enthusiasm. And you can think yourself out of a project before you even put pen to paper or, start typing, whichever way you do it. So I think write what excites you. What is the quality? I think I like the quality of being super observant, seeing something and writing about it in only the way you can write about it. Somebody said to me the other day, I was talking about my new book, the one that I put the other one hold for, so book number 4, and I was going to reach out to somebody to get, you know, some help with one of the characters, because one of the characters does something that I have never done before, and I needed an expert's opinion. And this person said to me, aren't you afraid? And it was an author actually. And she said, aren't you afraid someone's going to steal your idea? And this is the thing. First of all, if you told me right now you were going to write a story about a horse, and I said, oh my gosh, Stephen, I can't believe you just said that. My book is about a horse. Okay, what's the likelihood that we're going to write the same book? We're not writing the same book. And in the end, if you write a book about a horse and I do too, we actually can help each other's position in when we launch or when we refer, because guess what? Horse lovers read tons of books, okay? And when they finish yours, they're going to want to read mine. So I'm not threatened by someone who writes on the same topic. I actually think that we can help each other and we can share audiences. And that's basically one of the hardest things when you write a book, is knowing who your reader is. That is the hardest thing to know when you're marketing. You know, who is my ultimate reader? Who am I speaking to? Who do I have to get the attention of? So writing something that excites you, be super observant, write about something in your own life that you're an expert in, have a great imagination, and act before you think. It's really easy.
I think that's amazing advice. I think every single piece of that was just great and resonates for sure.
I was joking about the easy part, you know that, right?
I do.
Yeah, I just want everyone to know that. Okay.
Right, but sometimes kind of not feeling overwhelmed by it. Yes, I mean, it's not easy, but sometimes just feel like pretending like it's easy is going to be helpful for you.
And pretending it's easy, but the other thing I think is super maybe helpful to someone who's starting their first project, it's okay for it to be your secret. It could be your secret project. You don't have to tell a soul about it. Make it your secret for the first couple of months or the first 20,000 words, you know, because that's the other thing. If you get feedback from the wrong people, that's also something that can shut you down really fast. And my whole point to you is your main goal is finishing the thing, getting to the end. So you don't want these like obstacles, and so make it a secret for a while. It's kind of fun, actually.
Yeah, and also allow yourself to write a first draft that is not perfect, a first draft, you know, a crappy first draft, let's call it.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think that's something, allow yourself to learn as you go, which is something that you do. You said you often don't have it figured out until later on, right? You work, and then, you know, you get there. So I think amazing advice.
No one writes their last draft first.
Right. No, that's a great line. So I want to ask just 2 more things. And I want to make sure that we get a little more information about, you know, your consulting business and what you offer to your clients. But before that, I wanted to ask, like, in this world today, social media is just so, you know, significant. It's such a significant part of our lives. And I know a lot of authors really have to harness social media or you know, or a website or an app like Goodreads, right? Goodreads or Amazon book clubs. I have a question, you know, around that. Like, how have you kind of harnessed social media or, you know, or Goodreads, which is a place where you can actually, you know, communicate with your, you know, with your readers, which is super cool. And then the second part of that, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, you know, your consulting business and what that's all about and what you offer.
Sure. Well, speaking of Goodreads for a minute, I actually teach a course on Goodreads and how authors can use Goodreads. It's an amazing site especially for someone who's an introvert and who hates the word marketing or thinks they're allergic to the concept of marketing. It's a great place to find your reader and do so much with that site. And as far as social media goes, and also you asked me way back when we started this, why do I think the Memory Box took off the way it did? I mean, that book has sold over 200,000 copies, which is shocking to me. It's shocking. And there is one thing not one thing, I mean, like I said to you before, I marketed it in a multi-tiered strategy of marketing, but one of the greatest things that happened was it took off by word of mouth like wildfire. People love to talk about that book. I think partly because something happens at the very end that when you finish the book, you need to talk about it. I don't know if you've ever read a book like that. Like there's something that was not expected at all. And you're like, I have to find someone who's read this because I need to talk about it. Well, what happened was it became a book club darling. And I have personally attended over 200 book clubs for that book, that one book. And part of and that went back to sort of my Estee Lauder. I know I talked about what did I learn from that experience and from that woman when she was trying to sell 8 products and no one knew who she was. It was in 1950. And she said one of her strategies was, as a cosmetic executive, if you touch a woman, you will have her for life. You will have her as a customer for life. And the way I modernized that idea was in a book club. If I get to sit in a book club, and if a book club invites me to appear during their discussion, I know I have those people for life as readers because we connect in person. We connect about, where they thought the book was going or what they loved or what they, a lot of them don't like a certain character or a certain scene, and we connect. And that is so amazing. And I don't know if you've ever had the ability to connect with an author of a book you love. It's so special. It really is special. Sometimes I'm in my own town and I'm like at the grocery store. I remember this happened the year it launched. I was in the grocery store and this is months after the book launch, and somebody would walk up to me and say, "How are the girls doing?" And I'd be like, "What?" I have 2 children, but I have a boy and a girl. And I remember the first time that happened. And then I realized she meant the girls in the Memory Box. Okay. And that was, I don't know, one of the most wonderful things that has ever happened, that people think about the characters after the book is over. And this woman was asking how they were doing. How fascinating is that? I was like, I don't know. I haven't thought about them in a long time, but maybe, if I write a sequel to that book, I'll think about them again. But so I would say the power of book clubs connected to social media, the power of social media, where people were talking about the book so years ago, Facebook, there were all these great book groups on Facebook, thriller book groups and psychological thriller book groups. And people would have book clubs on social media, on Facebook. Now it's more Instagram and TikTok. So you sort of, which is kind of the downside of social media. It's like just when you figure out how to work something, there's another social media that's more important to to books and publishing and reading and things like that. But that combination is just kind of incredible. It goes back to like, yeah, it's nice to have a traditional deal and to have your book bought and to get in advance and all that. But look, we can make it happen as indies. We can go straight to the reader. You go straight to the reader when you're on any social media platform. So did I answer both sides of those?
No, I wanted to Well, almost. So I just wanted to make sure that you let everybody know about the consulting business
Oh,
as well.
yeah.
So someone has asked, I just want to include this just because it came in. Somebody's asking how you word or do you ever have an elevator pitch for your books? Like if you're pitching the book to a potential publisher, I think of elevator pitch as something, I might do when I finish a screenplay. I kind of pitch it in a very short way. But does it work? Do you need to have kind of an elevator pitch for your book project as well?
Absolutely. And I think having 3 versions is a great idea. Having a one-liner, having a 1 paragraph to put in like a query letter to an agent, for instance, and then having something longer so these are the 3, a short one, a 1 sentence where you're actually just telling someone maybe in an elevator or at a party, what are you writing? And The Memory Box is a great one-liner. It's a book about a woman who Googles herself and discovers the shocking details of a past she doesn't remember. And that's the one-liner. It pretty much it encapsulates what's happening in that book. The paragraph, you'll use it over and over again. That longer version, maybe 3 paragraphs, you'll use that as your book description for your book jacket, for the back cover, or for your Amazon description. Some authors like to write their blurb first before they write their book, and it becomes their North Star, sort of. Like when they're writing and they're in the trenches and they're lost, it's like, where am I going from here? They go back to that paragraph that they wrote, and it kind of leads them and guides them to what they wanted or what they originally thought of the book, where they wanted to take it. So yes, super duper important. And it's super important to make sure that that description reflects the genre you're working in. So using those genre tropes, if it's a thriller, using the words that are used in thriller writing and reflecting those keywords, reflecting those tropes in your description, that will help you immensely to sell it, if that's your intention, to sell it to traditional publisher or to indie publish. This is not wasted effort. This is really important stuff to do, definitely.
I think that's a perfect question and answer to end this on. But I do want to point out that for everyone here to check out your website and to sign up for your email, your email
Newsletter
communication, newsletters. Because again, I think it is very cool how you have, you've really kind of parlayed all your business experience and your experiences as a self-published author into this consulting business where you can actually help others learn how to and navigate that process. So I want to make sure everyone is aware that your website is up and it's really rich, with content. But I just want to thank you so much, Eva. This was an amazing event, and you shared a lot of information that I think is extremely important and beneficial to everybody here. So
thank you. And I guess my parting thought for everyone is sometimes the thing you least want to happen is the best thing for you, is the greatest thing to happen. And that's kind of what happened with the self-publishing. But because certainly I would not be teaching and consulting authors on how to market or how to self-publish, or even speaking. And, it opened up a world for me that I would have never had otherwise. So success happens in many different ways,
Well, we wish you much success on the next 2 books.
Thank you.
And I will wait for the day when I see The Memory Box on the big screen. And
awesome. I hope it happens, Stephen.
All right. It's gonna happen. We're putting it out there in the universe. It's out there.
Cool.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure, Eva.